recognition of our Artist in Residence program. So Annette had come here January 8th through the 15th. So her residency has already completed, but she's returned back, and she, as she will explain, has used printmaking in a very interesting way to construct something three-dimensionally, which I really appreciate because it means that you can think of prints differently, something that goes beyond that two-dimensional flat plane. So to give a bit of information, Anette Millington is an artist and designer whose practice is centered on pattern. Her work includes textile sculptures and wall hangings, as well as collaborative design projects linking craft and technology. Material focus is textile print and embellishment, and she's considering relationships between communication and orientation. Annette is a professor at the Parsons School of Design. She holds the positions of Associate Director of the MFA Textiles program. She is also Assistant Professor of the Fashion Systems and Materiality Department and has worked in museum education. Some of the organizations that Annette has worked at include the Museum of Modern Art, the Guggenheim Museum, the Museum of Arts and Design, and the Brooklyn Museum. Annette has been reviewed online by Hyperallergic and in print by the Boston Globe, and she's received her MFA from the School of Visual Arts and her BFA from the Massachusetts College of Art. So with that, I'm going to pass the talk now over to Annette Millington, and we'll hear more about her work and the project here.
Great, thank you so much. Hi, everybody. There is one chair up front if anyone is looking and wanting a place to sit and get comfortable. My name's Annette. Thank you all for coming. I really appreciate you coming out today to learn more about my practice and what it was that I undertook here at my residency. And I also just want to say thank you again to the Center for Contemporary Printmaking for a fantastic, short, but infinite residency and experience. So, as you have heard, my art practice is centered on pattern, and I work with textile print and embellishment. I'm really interested in relationships between ornamentation, pattern, and communication, storytelling, myth making. I make a range of work, so you're going to see a large range of projects today. The majority of these pieces are textile sculptures and or wall hangings. And I work with a variety of processes. Essentially, things that repeat are compelling to me. And so I work with a variety of ways that I can move from hand into digital design and then out again into material. So I'm working with quilting, I'm working with digital print, woodblock print, silkscreen, and then also other forms like digitally designed woven and digital embroidery. And before we get into the work, I'll be talking for about a half hour today and mostly kind of show and tell to share with you the scope of the work. But I think it's really helpful to center the conversation in a few principles that are important to me, important to my practice, and will reappear in different media. So what you're going to be seeing within my work is a combination of logic and spirit. So the mathematical system of a pattern is really important to me, as is the way that it can imbue an object with a protective power, transform fear, contend with mystery. Within my work, we're going to see tons of symmetry. And there's two kinds of symmetry that are really important to me. One is bilateral symmetry. So that's just like a mirror reflection. And whenever I'm using bilateral symmetry in my work, typically what I'm doing is I'm trying to make something animate. I'm trying to make it alive. So I might be making a large sculpture that is serving as a guardian for a particular place. I might be marking something, but again, I'm really animating whenever I'm using bilateral symmetry. The other kind of symmetry that is very compelling to me is radial symmetry. So this is like a flower with all the petals going around the center point. And when I'm working with radial symmetry within my work, I'm essentially dealing with an idea of forever, of infinity, a kaleidoscope. The idea of moving through the unknown. So these pieces for me are less guardian, but more guide. And then the other principle that we're going to see coming through much of my work in different materials is the relationship between geometry, abstraction, and the kinds of patterns that we find in nature. I'm specifically interested in patterns that are protective and extra interested in ways in which nature uses brightly colored markings in order to hold off and kind of create a warning. So the way that a prey is holding off a predator through a kind of opulent pattern, essentially saying, don't eat me, I'm poison. And so I bring this up because I think it's really important to understand that within my work, the role of ornamentation is beautiful for sure, and it is also meant to be highly protective and to kind of create a sense of both attraction and repelling. So we'll see these principles echoing through the work. And I want to focus the talk today really in three parts, since we are in a place of print, I assume in a room full of printmakers. I'm going to move through the work focusing on the forms of print that I use. And first I'll be showing you what is mostly digital print. This is digital print on textile, textile that I then quilt, twist, sew, and form to make three-dimensional wall works and sculptures. So I want to start off with these pieces here. These pieces are about 4 feet by 4 feet. They're smaller pieces, kind of blankets that either sit in the room or hang on the wall. And I think they're a nice place to start because you can see how I'm working with patterning that I'm seeing from butterfly wings and reworking. I'm then printing pattern on digital print and folding up my most favorite shape in the world, which is an isosceles tetrahedron, which is essentially a 4-sided shape that includes these elongated triangle shapes. I'll tell you a secret. I became obsessed with these shapes when I would play with my son, who is here today. Hello, Navarro. When he was young, and he had a fantastic toy called the Magnetile, which I spent many an hour with and was really intrigued by the relationship between 2-dimensional to 3-dimensional patterning. And that kind of play really sparked an important direction in my work, working across 2 and 3 dimensions. So again, within the work, you see these isosceles tetrahedrons. Here, this is a much larger piece. This piece stands 8 feet tall, so it is larger than me. And this is an example of the kind of piece that, for me, is very much a guardian type figure that I'm making to mark space. This is a digital print, again. This is quilted, top quilted, and then sewn up into these particular segments. This piece actually has a lot of magnets in it. It pops flat and pops together and comes together in order to make this large figure. So I'll move through these series here. Again, these are large guardian type figures. Some of these pieces are interior, oops, I'm sorry. Some of them are exterior pieces as well. Okay, and then radial symmetry. So again, these pieces are really about forever. They're a kind of kaleidoscope. They're a portal. They are swirling around in space. And again, with this piece specifically, I'm working from butterfly patterning and then reflecting that, quilting on top, and sewing into the cloth. This particular piece has a kind of wooden dowel structure inside. It's about 3 feet round. This last piece here is called Compass Rose. It stands about 4 feet tall. It is also top quilted, digital print on canvas, and then sewn up. This piece I thought would be really important to show today because it uses the same variation of an isosceles tetrahedron. It's not actually an isosceles tetrahedron anymore. It's kind of a made-up combination of these triangular forms. Here you see there's like 1, 2, 3, 4 kind of branches on top, and then these 4 structures underneath coming together. This is the same form that I used to make this piece here that I'll talk about at the end of my talk, which was created here at the Center for Contemporary Printmaking. So I wanted to share this piece and then also just take a moment to kind of slow down and tell you a little bit more what I'm talking about when I'm saying I'm working with digital print. So when I'm working with digital print, I'm actually starting off with hand paint, gouache. Sometimes I'm working on a tablet in Procreate, but I'm really just drawing. I'm drawing from butterfly wings. I'm playing with patterns and kind of thinking about these defensive markings that inspire me. Then what I'm doing is I'm bringing the image into the digital space, into Photoshop and or Illustrator, where I am making selections and playing with refracting. So the triangle becomes really important because that's the way in which I'm kind of building the repeat throughout the piece. And I'm designing and kind of planning a way that the piece will fold up and it will be both continuous but also varied. Okay. So once I have that, once I have that digital design, the work, when it's a digital print, that's then printed out on textiles. So it's either on canvas or on velvet, I enjoy very much. And then I'm working sewing and stitching. I'm also, in terms of construction, using a lot of things that typically we do when we make clothing. As was shared, I do teach within a fashion curriculum, and one of my specialties is embellishment. So my students are making clothing. We're also very focused on things like beading, applique, etc. So within my sculptures, I'm bringing zippers as a way to connect modules into full sculptures. I'm bringing what we might typically do more with leather work in terms of lacing in order to construct with this 3-dimensional soft material. And then I'm also usually using some kind of hard material in there in order to give the sculpture body. Again, similar to the way you would put boning in a corset or something like. Okay, so we did digital print. Now I thought I would move to my work with silkscreen. I love to make things, and I also love to play, and I love to play with colleagues who work in different ways. And so this particular project that I'm showing you is actually a collaborative project. This project was created with a full team and primarily with a designer, Travis Finch, who's trained as an architect and does a lot of work doing 3D printed embellishment on textile. Travis and I received a grant from the Center for Craft in which we wanted to play with textile that would react to its environment. So one of the things that we did in the scope of our time together is we developed a silkscreen ink that is UV sensitive, so we could think about designing in color change to the textile. So essentially the thing goes in the sunlight, woo, it changed colors, it's kind of magical, and it really added a fun layer of thinking about both camouflage, but then also formal things, like how do you make a pattern that works in 2 different kinds of color states. So you can see here, this is an example of a silk screen where typically if you're inside, the cloth looks almost white, and then when you take it outside, it turns into this fantastic kind of purple magenta. Travis is even more obsessed and interested in patterns than I am, I might say. And so a big part of our work together was designing and playing with pattern. These are kind of biomorphic patterns that we imagined, and then we selected a print that came onto the final silk screen. And here you can see a very clear demonstration where my hand was down when the light came in, so you can see the difference of color with light and without light. We wanted to design a print that would flow across the surface and could be put together in different ways. And we demonstrated what this print might do by creating a structure. Travis created these really fantastic nodes that allowed us to build a lattice, and then we were able to build a structure with these cloth kind of sails of silkscreen that would change color and vary in the light. Okay, so like I said, I like to play and work with teams and be inspired by new challenges. A friend of mine who knew I was really interested in print and worked with digital print and with silkscreen invited me to undertake a woodblock project a couple of years ago. And this is a steamroll print project. So why not learn a new material by doing it really, really, really big? And I figured, okay, if I haven't figured out how to carve wood by the time I'm done with my 4-foot by 8-foot piece, well, then I'm never going to be into carving wood. I'm really into carving wood. By the time I was finished with the 4-foot by 8-foot piece, I think I would call myself hooked as a woodblock printmaker. So what I'm showing you right here is I'm showing you, and I'll bring you a little bit more through the process, but I'm showing you 2 final prints. Both of these are 4 feet by 8 feet tall, and they were hand carved and printed with a steamroll print. To back up, because I know you all, or many of you I'm sure, are printmakers and makers, so I wanted to kind of take you behind the scenes into these pieces. So again, the way that I begin a lot of my work is through hand drawing and observational drawing. So here we see a suite of ink drawings that are from seaweed found at the ocean and flowers and weird kind of materials, botanicals. So I'm doing a lot of drawing all the time. I also, like I told you, really love symmetry. So I love to cut paper because it's a fantastic way just to play with symmetry. It's also a fantastic way to be surprised. So here you see a series of just little hand-cut pieces of paper where I know I want to bring bilateral symmetry into the piece. So I'm just folding black paper and kind of cutting and thinking like bug, flower. And then out come things that involve a little bit of surprise. And I very much love bringing a mathematical system into the work because for me, it does kind of have a lovely balance between something that I can anticipate that has a sense of control, but also totally surprises me. I feel like these are as much about what I wanted to do with the scissors as they are about what reflection does. Okay, so once I have these drawings, I then will bring them in to the digital space again. And I will interlay textures and marks from the drawings into the paper cutouts. And so that's really fun because then it's like what I end up with is something that looks kind of like a flower, kind of like a bug. It's kind of real, but it's kind of not, right? So there's a nice ambiguity that happens through these multiple steps of transformation within the work. So for these suites of woodblock prints, what I then wanted to do is I wanted to create, again, these kind of guardian figures. So these are much more, I would say, kind of symbolic than the larger sculptures that are a little bit more geometric, but really function in the same way as those large, tall textile columns do in being these kind of protective type figurines. I think these have, much more, maybe this is an owl, maybe this is a bug. So there's different kinds of associations that we make, clearly related to something like a Rorschach sort of ink blot. Our imagination begins to take over, and we feel a kind of animation from these particular figures. Okay, so here we can see the carving of the wood. So again, these really big blocks were all carved with very, very small tools. And what I loved about the wood carving is I think it brought a sense of there's a kind of like muscular quality to the physicality of carving the wood that I think is really important. There's also like an inability to be perfect with the symmetry, which I thought brings like a really playful sense of hand into something that also was digitally designed, right? So I loved the way that the wood carving brought back a kind of hand and touch, sense of organic, I think, to the digital drawing. And then here we see one of the wood blocks inked and being printed and being rolled over by or first it was rolled, now it's being pulled by the steam. Okay, and here we have, just for scale, you can see the floor. These are actually the blocks before they were printed, and I think there's something fantastic when the ink goes on, but there's something fantastic before the ink goes on, when you just have that like mark and carved mark within the wood. So this was the first piece that I created in 2023, and then this piece I made this past fall for the same rollout event in Beacon, New York. Okay, and that brings me to here. So when I applied for the residency, I really came with a couple of ambitions. One was to spend time with an actual press, because I was spending so much time carving wood, but not having the experience of a press to get prints that I could really kind of play with both color and the nuance of the print. So I wanted the access to the press, and I have to say, being able to live with the press is like no other experience. So amazing and fantastic. I also wanted to take what I had been playing with in terms of the wood block and kind of bring it into 3-dimension, like what I do with textiles. So that was one of my other goals for the residency. And I really did quite a lot in a week. I think I was so overexcited with the access to the press. I felt like I'll never have a press again. And so I undertook really 2 projects while I was here at the cottage. So I will show you the 2. And the first one I'm going to start with, because I think it really rolls out of those woodblock prints that I had made for the steamroll print, and actually reuses and recycles some of the bilateral, symmetric, imaginary flower bug things, but puts them into a kind of garden with a seamless repeat. So I thought it would be fun to do a seamless repeat. Many of the kind of print forms that I use are more geometric. I use a 2M repeat a lot, which is kind of like a simple reflect, 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 reflect in order to make a continuous pattern. But I thought it would be really fun to carve a block that in and of itself would be a print chunk and would then repeat and give me more of a flowing kind of a print. So I created this piece, Shadow Garden, while I was here. This is the digital design that I created before arriving. And then I arrived with my design transferred onto the block, but not carved. And thought, yeah, I'll just carve it in a week. That'll be totally fine. While also doing a 3-dimensional 2-layer color print. I actually think it was important for me to be able to have the carving with the press, because it allowed me to just sort of balance my time in different ways. So later at night in the evening, I would be carving, and then during the day, working more with the press. So I undertook the carving and got really into it. The block itself is 36 by 48. Okay, you can see it there to scale. And then these are some details of the final prints. I was able to pull 4 lovely prints to kind of demonstrate the repeat. And then I also was able to print a few pieces on textile that I will quilt on and embroider into later in the spring. Okay. And then the second project, and that I undertook, and this was really what I had proposed and kind of came here with the intention to do, which was to create a paper print and fold in order to end up with something like my textile pieces, but really kind of celebrate the type of depth and color that one can get with the oil ink on paper. So I was really interested in playing with color as well. So this is this piece here, and I will walk you through the process. So before I came, I spent some time designing. And again, I'm starting off with a botanical. Here's a piece of seaweed. And I'm knowing that I wanted to do colored paper, and I wanted to do a darker ink, perhaps black or like deep purple or something like magenta. And then I wanted to do a highlight layer. I had not done a 2-color print, so I wanted to do that. I also like pink. And so I began designing and thinking about this idea of magenta. I went through a bunch of designs, and again, you can see like I'm start off with the hand drawing, and then here, this is what I mean by a 2M repeat, right? So it's a pretty simple repeat where you just take a chunk and you flip it, flip it, flip it, flip it in order to get a repeat. But then I do more complicated things where I'm kind of refracting the space in order to fill up my chunk that I know is going to fold into 3 dimensions. So this is the same pattern piece that you saw earlier in that compass rose, the red quilt. And I'm just thinking about, what do I like? Like, what kind of pattern do I want to print? One of the dangers, but fun parts of working in pattern is that it doesn't stop, right? Like this part of the design process can keep going and going and going, where there's so many options and so many options. But then one has to move to material. So I came to the residency with these 2 blocks that I had already carved. I had what for me was like more of kind of a structural layer and then more of an accent layer. So I brought these 2 pieces. And when I first got here, I unwrapped my paper. And I thought I had ordered a fantastic magenta. And I did. I did order a fantastic magenta, but it only looked magenta when my camera looked at it. To my eyes, the magenta was actually a much, much deeper, kind of like burgundy purple type color. And I had, on a whim, ordered this pistachio paper that I ended up kind of really loving the most once I was working with the physical paper. And I think this is one of the fantastic parts of working with material, is that sometimes you have an idea, especially one you've spent hours on in a digital space, and then material has a different idea for you. So, okay, back to the drawing board in terms of color. How would I work with color in this particular kind of context? Because what I had planned was not going to work. I'm glad that I got here. I like it better than where I was before. I think it's actually much more interesting because what I ended up with, I had this like chartreuse and this kind of pink, and that's playing with like the red-green complementary color pairing, which means the colors are like fighting with each other a little bit visually, which I think adds a sense of creepy. It adds that kind of poison type quality to the print. So I ended up deciding on a pink ink that I would use, and then like an incredibly dark purple. This is the series of prints that I printed, and I have to thank Chris, who helped me with the registration in order to get the 2 layers to work so beautifully. I also decided to add in, I think the rainbow roll it's called, that little gradation where I went from, kind of a more pink into this sort of light pink lemonade. And I think that works really well when the piece comes into 3-dimension, because it's just adding a little bit more depth, having that variation within the print. So while I was here, I printed a series, about 15 of these prints. And I went home with them to dry, knowing that I would need about 12 of them in order to make the piece. There is a second yet to be birthed sculpture that will be also folded up in the same way. So this is that darker, more magenta paper. And again, I switched the color story because I just needed a little bit more tension. So I went with that kind of turquoise in order to pick up that red-green complementary color pop that just gives us a little bit more charge to the print. So this is to be continued, but we'll come back here. So when I went home, then is the folding and the sewing. And I have to tell you, fabric is more forgiving than paper. I didn't with these, which would be something interesting to try in the future. So I decided that I wanted a little more body to the paper. So I did back the paper when I got home. So it's all like hand mounted. And then what I ended up doing in terms of assembly is I used a combination of gluing with actually a majority of, I couldn't stop sewing. So I used some bookbinding stitches. Here you see like the central spine of the like inside part where everything needs to be strong and hold together. All of those inside spines are like pamphlet stitches, like bookbinding pamphlet stitches. And then there are certain parts that are glued and then other parts where I'm using just, a running stitch to kind of pull and put the piece together. So in using a combination of stitching and gluing, the two-dimensional prints turned into the final piece that we have here. And don't worry, I won't drop it. This is my husband who has lovingly helped me and helps me bring this. We'll wonder why I'm holding it, but it's okay. So what's fun about the particular piece is I think there's so many possible angles that one has, right? The piece could sit this way, in which you have like a little bit more of a floral sensibility with the piece. And then the piece also can lay. And I think what's fun when it lays is it does look like it's going to fly or take off, or it kind of becomes a little bit more animated. It's less something growing out of the ground. I think it also has a little bit more sci-fi sense to it. I'll show you the side. Again, I really enjoy the way the gradation kind of worked coming across the surfaces and into the print.
So,
yes.
this is what kind of paper?
So this is Lokta paper, which is like a fibrous bush kind of material. So the paper itself, I've worked with this paper in the past. What I like about, and it's also now mounted on like a thicker kind of Bristol paper, which is giving it the body. What's nice about this particular paper is that it gets wet nicely. It's fantastic for like paper mache because it wants to take glue and kind of flump. It also, because it's fibrous, you can poke it with a needle and stitch it, and then also kind of like rub it out and soften it. So I chose it in part because I loved the color, and I also chose it because I thought it would be forgiving in working with it in 3 dimensions and potentially stitching it. With that, actually, we can probably move into more questions. I do want to make sure that I say thank you to everyone here at the Center for Contemporary Printmaking, Kimberly and Tony, who are here today, and then Chris, who helped me so much with printing and getting that registration, and Liz, who helped me get settled in the studio and dig out all the colors of ink. And I really just enjoyed my time here and felt that everyone was incredibly, generous. And the space was really generous to have that much time and focus and time with the press. So with that, I would love to answer any questions that folks might have. Yeah, hi.
Hi, thank you so much.
Yeah.
I do abstract cyanotypes and when it's in the sun, amazing colors appear and they're gone. The pigment that you talked about, is that available commercially?
Not exactly, but yes, also. So really what we did is you can purchase like color changing pigment in different ways. You can purchase paints. I don't believe you can purchase a printmaking material, but you can purchase powder and you can purchase like clear ink and you can mix them. The one thing I will say that I think is important to also know with these materials, I do not think that they're particularly archival in the sense that like the material is not developed to last forever, and I don't know how long like those particular color changing prints will continue to change color, if that makes sense. So I would just also add that in. Yeah.
What are the cultural sources of your materials?
The cultural sources?
Yeah, like do you research different cultures and like leftover paper specifically, or did I pronounce that right?
I believe so.
Like where does that come from?
So I believe that that's from Nepal, that particular paper. So, I mean, I think that is a big and interesting and important question. And I think whenever anyone is working with print iconography in terms of culture, there's like a huge lineage of symbol making and culture that comes into the work. So I don't have particular sources of the culture where I would say, okay, I'm looking at this particular culture and then I'm using that or reworking that inspiration within my work. What I am doing though, and working with symmetry, and I think working with natural forms and shapes that then move through that system of being simplified and being repeated in different ways, I think there's many echoes with what one might find in other types of cultures. I mean, I think that, for example, pieces like this, I think there are many cultures where one can see a kind of, god or goddess figure that's symmetrical, that might play with, multiple parts of the body. I'm thinking of Hindu goddesses, things like. One also might think about like a surrealist kind of exquisite corpse where you have a sense of head, middle, body, and something is layered. And I think all of those particular forms are working with a kind of centralized symmetry. They're also working with like repetition and kind of playing with what is real and the sense of the supernatural being, if that makes sense. Yeah. Other questions? Yeah.
So before your digital process,
Yeah.
you're cutting things out of paper.
Yeah.
And really sort of following like where the shapes take you.
Yeah.
To consider
Yeah.
insects or plant biology.
That.
Are there particular shapes or textures that typically like resonate with you, like what you're looking for, what that shape should turn into?
It's an interesting question, and I think it's also like it's an interesting question to think of, like when one is playing, what is that moment of like, oh, that's right, that's the right thing in the play versus no, that's not the right. So in terms of what I'm thinking about, I mean, I might have a book of like botanicals or bugs, and I might look at it in order to be like, oh, okay, let me start with something bulbous down here and have a long leg off here and play with that. So I do like to have inspiration around where I might begin. The sense of like what is right or what is not interesting, I think for me is very intuitive. Again, it's a super interesting question. I think what I'm looking for within the shape is something that feels sort of familiar. Again, it's like, oh, okay, that's kind of like a plant, or it's kind of, like a bug, but it's also not quite too literal, if that makes sense. I think I'm also looking for a feeling in the work, which is like really beautiful, but also probably like a little creepy as well. So I think I'm looking for that edge. Like I will sometimes feel like, it's too pretty, or ooh, it's too much, right? So it's like, I think I'm looking for that midpoint between something that's like attracting and something that's repelling. Other questions? We'll do, I'm looking at two people at once, which is not particularly helpful. So we'll do the back and then we'll come over here. Yeah.
Thank you. I love your talk and I love your work. I have a technical question.
Yeah.
When you showed the image of the wood block with your color swatches, do you have a wood plate for each color, or are you painting the one wood block by hand for each color and then printing it?
Yeah, let's see. I think you're asking about this one?
Yes.
Okay, so where are those wood blocks? Hold on. There we go. Okay, so I have two wood blocks for this particular piece. So it's just 2 layers, and the one is the dark purple, and then the other block, this block here, is rolled with just a gradation of like mid pink to light pink, if that makes sense. And then the paper has color. So I think what happens visually at like quick glance is that you experience more color than is actually there. And I think part of what also is doing that is the amount of tension between that particular pink and that particular chartreuse. So I think you get a little bit of bounce. So it's almost like, it felt like by using the colored paper, by using just that simple gradation, and by adding in, and again, the paper made me do this, I didn't know I needed to at first, adding in tension between the ink and the paper, it's more activated visually. So I think the experience is something that has more color than it actually has. Yeah. And that's what, and it's mostly like an optical illusion thing that I think is giving us most of the vibration. I also think it's doing optically, whenever you have light to dark gradation, our mind thinks that there's space, right? That we get a sense of volume. So this has literal volume because it's folded, but then it also has like an optical kind of color volume that might be playing. So like something folding down is light, where normally something folding down gets shadow on it. So I think that also adds a little bit the sense of like activity, is that the gradation is like in contradiction with the physical gradation of 3-dimension, if that makes sense. Yeah. Yes.
I'm really enjoying this and I'm fascinated. So you have these blocks of wood.
Yeah.
They're on plywood.
Uh-huh.
Half-inch plywood.
Or let's see, what did I use? I used the, what is it? Sheena wood. It's lovely. It's so correct. Like the big ones I'm showing you is like a plywood from the hardware store. This wood, you can get it from, I think McLean's has it. I don't know if other places sell it. You have to order it, but it's like buttery wood. Highly recommended if you're new to wood block carving. Okay, keep going.
So it comes to you that way, or you buy the huge pieces.
Yeah.
Of plywood at Home Depot. So you carve them and you ink them. How do you print them?
Oh, the big ones?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So the big one, right, because these, everything I did here got to go through the press.
Right.
So that was amazing. I mean, that was like, wow, that's what you're supposed to do. That really works out. So for these pieces here.
Yeah, that one on the left.
Yeah. So this is a steamroller.
I'm sorry.
Like a steamroller that like makes concrete.
From the street?
From the street. Yeah. So folks do these projects. I mean, this is like a thing printmakers have done, and I don't really know the lineage of it. It's fun. It's like a thing. You like hire a steamroller, and it shows up not to like lay concrete, but to make prints. And then you have somebody generously driving it. You lay down the huge block. You have 2 people drop the paper, and you drive over it with a steamroller. It's super fun. Yeah, everybody loves it. This This is, again, this was an event in Beacon. I think we'll be doing it next fall probably, so come visit. What's great about these events is they're like really, you know, they're like a spectacle. So they're fun for the community. People come out, you know, everybody's like watching this crazy printmaking, you know, extravaganza. In terms of like print quality, it's pretty variable. You get varied pressure depending on the wood, depending on how it's set up. So you're going to get something that's not going to be nearly the same kind of like, you know, quality as you would off of the press. And I will also say these particular final prints here, I will thank my husband for reprinting in the backyard with a small glass baron. Yeah. And the whole thing. And we used, is it mesa paper? It's like that very, very thin paper. So that, for hand printing, that paper works incredibly well. So these two like massive prints, they're not perfect when you look at them in terms of detail because, you know, they're hand done. But that is the challenge. If you decide to go forth and carve this wild, huge wood, you then realize quite quickly there are very few places in the world that one could properly, quote unquote, print. Yeah.
I hope, do you take the actual wood, the block, and perhaps hang it up as our itself?
So this is the challenge with the wood. It looks so good before the ink goes on. Like so good. And then you put the ink on it, it's still okay. And then you print it a bunch of times, and then you kind of clean it off, and it's gone. I mean, it's beautiful because it's kind of like a black on black, like burnished, embossed thing. It's actually quite beautiful, but no longer. I mean, I think there are woodblock folks who don't necessarily clean off their. I have a friend, like, she doesn't like to clean off her things. She likes to leave it. So I think it depends how you're cleaning, but yes, this particular board no longer exists, but that's okay because that's what life is. Any other questions? Yeah.
How do you get your design transferred onto the board?
Oh, that's good. Yeah. This is the kind of stuff printmakers want to talk about right here because this is the kind of stuff you want to know. Hold on, what is the best way I can show backwards? Okay. So these are two different ways that I got the design onto the board. So I do have, at Parsons, we have massive plotter printers. There's a plotter printer in here hiding somewhere, I believe, as well. No, maybe not. So I printed out on a plotter, which is just a really big printer, a huge piece of paper. For the first time I did the project. And then I used graphite transfer paper and I, by hand, transferred the entire thing and then inked the entire thing and then carved the entire thing, which probably duplicated the hours of work. I then found an inkjet printer paper that I really like. McLean's also sells it. It's kind of like a monotype paper. It's like a waxy kind of film paper that you just put in your regular inkjet printer. And it comes out, because it's waxy, the ink doesn't go into the paper. It's just sitting on the surface. And then you just flop it down on your board incredibly quickly. You got to go super quick. You can't think about it. You boom, and it gives you your design transferred. So that's what I used for the last large piece and for the piece that I carved here. The only challenge is it is 8.5 by 11. So digitally what I had to do is I had to take my massive design and I had to chop it into like 30, 40 pieces. And I had to sit there with my printer and like go in order and print them out and stick it and print it out and stick it kind of in a grid as best as I could. So it's that is the problem if you want to use it at scale. But if you're printing kind of small, it is a super lovely way. If your primary design process is digital, of course. Yeah. I don't remember the actual name. I think that it's McLean's. Am I getting that right? Yeah. McLean's sells it. If you look on like transfer papers, it'll be on their website. It's great. And again, if you go boom quick, it's like it does a really, really good impression. If you think about it and worry, it's over. It drives up on you. So, yeah. Yeah.
Do you ever research theoretical four-dimensional shapes for
You know, not really in a mathy way, but yeah. I mean, I really love prisms and fractals. I haven't gotten as deep into like deep math theory, and more like to play with sort of simple things over and over and over again. But I think that the work is very much about the way that something is repeating through space physically. So this is like good homework that you're giving me to spend more time with that.
It alludes to four-dimensional shapes. Like it's like an illusion of four dimensions almost.
Oh, okay. So now I have absolute homework
Yes.
that I'm going to go and I'm going to do. And again, I mean, I think a lot of this work really started playing with children's math manipulatives, right? That are meant to kind of put us in that space of working with math physically. Which, speaking of, does my son have a question?
Yes. What's the red for on the block? Because you put ink on it and then you also carve it out. What's like the red part of the block?
Ah, very good question. So, right, because I did the transfer paper, which is like black on wood. And then the reason that the red is washed on top is so, hold on, where's a good one? So I can see when I carve, like see how it's done light. So, and this is what we were talking about earlier. I think folks have lots of different things that they work with. This is just like red watered down acrylic. But it's just the board is stained, so you can see what you're doing when you're carving.
So it's red at first, and when you carve it, it turns white.
Yes, exactly. And so when I have the design on there, what I know is that I have to carve everything that is red. So it's like you just keep going until it stops, which, I mean, so like all of that red background had to be carved out of the wood. Yeah. And again, it looks like super beautiful before it prints because you do see a little bit of that red underneath. Folks like different colors. Some folks use purple, whatever it is. I like red. I like fire. Any other questions?
Yes.
Yeah.
So coming here for the residency,
Yes.
getting to work with Chris
Mm-hmm.
and learning about, I would say, like other practices that are
Yep.
inherent to printmaking.
Yes.
But you've been doing printmaking.
Yes.
But where will this take you? What's your next thought?
Yes. Well, that's the good part because coming up with things to do is never the hard part. Doing them's hard. So immediately, and I told Chris, I'm going to stay an extra night because I'm behind, but don't worry. I'm going to make this full color version of the flowers tonight. To which Chris said, next residency. So, I mean, I think immediately what I want to do is even just reprint and work with this particular block with color, because of course this wants to be color and it wants to be like weird acidic colors like this particular piece. Having done the work with Chris, like just thinking about the registration with the two blocks, again, you can like research something and then you can just start playing and you begin to get ideas while you're in the material. So it was all of a sudden like super clear that, okay, there's so many smart and economical ways that a printmaker can create the illusion of tons of color without maybe having tons and tons of blocks, right? So I think the idea of working with monoprint as a background, or like gradation of a roll as background, and then layer of the woodblock in color, super obvious and something I want to play with. Stencils, potentially bringing stencils in and working with bigger cutout shapes in the background, and then the details on top, I think immediately would be super fun to work with. I think that I'm excited to sew onto the textile that I printed to kind of see how that works. Like block printed textile traditionally uses less of like an oil and a Western sort of print press. You're often using like deeper carved blocks and natural dyes and like printing like this on textile. So there's different ways that ink wants to soak into textile. So I feel like that's something I didn't even have time to kind of get close to, but I'm interested in the way in which the press printed textile will potentially work for sewing and quilting and things, like if I wanted to bring more hand process into the larger scale pieces. Yes, I think that makes sense. So I think mostly it's like, as soon as you start to play with something, there's more and more and more ideas. Again, I think what's really interesting about printmaking is that you're working, at least with the block printmaking, is that you're working with sequence. But there's like a varied set of things one might do with a block with color, but then there's also like an infinity to that. Like one could work with so many different variations. But I would say yes, color immediately is something that I'm thinking a lot more about. Yeah. Hi. Yes. But no, but yes. Right. Yes, good. So now I have more homework now. So, but exactly, right? Because like this could be totally printed on like super transparent paper. It could then be collaged and layered as well. I think there's also lots of potential for, paper in 3D. One can be like waxing more transparent papers and stitching into that. I think that could be very exciting to experiment with as well. And then Chris also told me now I should make paper. With like, oh, you're right, I could make the paper before I print it. But yes, that's a fantastic idea if one wanted a kind of like embedded pattern or surface and then the printing on top. One could also, mold wet pulpy paper in different ways as well, which would be a very different 3-dimensional process than working with dry paper. Yeah. Yes. You'll have to ask my family how many my husband is back there like, do not give her another method to work with. Yes, one of the other ambitions I had that I didn't get to was actually to work with the print on top of painted silk, or silk that had been painted ahead of time. So yes, absolutely. I think that makes a lot of sense as well. So I don't have a long arm. I have like a tabletop hybrid industrial domestic that it's a Juki, but it has like a pretty good bed, and so I can get like a nice free motion kind of vibe off of it. Juki, Juki. Yeah, the hybrid is nice for quilting. I use it also because it's what we use at school to sew up clothes. So they're a nice machine. Workhorses. Any other questions? Thank you guys. Oh yeah. Yeah.
What have you done with silkscreen other than the project that you did with the architect that you talked about?
Not a lot besides little tests and things. And I should be doing more. Right. Because I think a lot of starting from digital print and then coming into more like sort of deeper printing processes, I think there's just so much more that I could do. What's nice about the silk screen, I mean, it's different. I love the wood carving, and then the wood carving takes time. So there is like a direct from your digital to your screen. There's like a speed kind of a thing per se that I think would be really important. Like if I wanted to make a large sculpture, and I can work with scale. So I think there's a lot more to be done with silkscreen, for sure. We all need more time. Thank you very much.